Hello and welcome to another episode of Tapestry. I'm Tarun Chakrani and I'm joined by
Saz Agarwal, and we are going to share with you some of the stories from our research.
So Saz, we've introduced why we're doing Tapestry. We've touched on a few topics here and there, briefly covering different areas of Sindhis and the diaspora and all of that.
What we can do today is a little bit of looking at nostalgia and where the history comes from. And I think I'd like to start by asking you about your surname, Sakrani, and what does that mean? Where does it come from?
It's a really good question. So when I started my sort of phase of diving in or digging into my past, one of the first questions I asked my granddad was, where does our last name come? Because for me, Sakrani is sugar. It's sucker, sugar, it sort of make the connection. And all through my school life, I was always teased as Sakrani, so sugar queen, basically. So I always literally took sucker as like sugar. And he's like, no. I mean, yes, there is a connection, but it's not exactly that. It comes from the word or the place sukkar. And, that's where our ancestors originated from. And yes, it is known for its sugar cane fields or sugar production. And so you can make the association, but the origination is that place. To be frank, I didn't know anything about the city. And, you hear about Karachi, Hyderabad, all of these other places. And my grandparents all eventually, grew up in Hyderabad. So even if their ancestors came from Sakkar, they moved on to Hyderabad later. So we never heard of the city and the connection was never made. So till I asked the question, I would have not known. And then I obviously had to, dig into the history of the city a little bit to find out a bit more. But yeah, it's where we originate from, and
So nice that we're going straight to Sakkar, because one of the things that fascinates me about the stories I've heard is the connection to the Sakkar Barrage. And I always just thought, Sakkar Barrage, I'd keep hearing Sakkar Barrage. In my head, Sakkar Barrage was a dam. And people would tell me my grandfather built the Sakkar Barrage, or my great-grandfather built the Sakkar Barrage. And I'd be like, yeah, I'm sure he did. And I'm Queen Victoria's auntie, As we went along, as I read more, I realized Sakkar Barrage is not just a dam. It's this huge, enormous irrigation project that covers so much of Sindh. And it made large parts of the desert arable. People were growing crops. In fact, funnily, it's not funny, but it's really interesting. My friend Gomti, who I came across because she came to me and she told me that she visited Sindh as a child and she had very happy memories. One of the things she told, she herself, she's a South in Tamil Brahmin.
Right.
Calcutta, and she's an educator, but these memories of Sindh have never left her, which are obviously 80 years old, maybe slightly less. But one of the things she told me about is that her uncle was running this agriculture experimental farm in the desert. And
okay.
The size of the cauliflowers and the taste of those cauliflowers, she remembers to this day. So Sakkar is famous for its barrage. It had the largest cantilever bridge in the world, and it was kind of an icon of Sindhi pride. I'm not sure whether it still is, but it was a big deal. Another thing I heard about Sakkar is that there's this, one of the most prominent structures, I don't know now, but way back when, Mir Masoom Shah's Minar. And Mir Masoom Shah was a governor of Sindh in Akbar's times. Akbar, of course, was a Sindhi himself, in the sense that he was born in Umarkot, which is in Sindh. But Mir Masoom Shah built this tower in Sakkar. And the story goes that he had to prove his love to his beloved. So he took a burqa and climbed up to the top of the minar and he jumped. And the burqa opened like a parachute and he landed safely.
Wow.
So this story was told to me by Dr. Abdullah Mangi, who is actually from Sakkar, and his daughter Naveen is a good friend of mine. And how we became friends is because we were introduced to each other. Her Nana's village is Kerodero. And my Nana's village, although like you, my Nana probably saw his village, but none of his children saw it, and none of them even heard of it until
Right.
I was interviewing my mom about her background, and she said, Asanjo Got Kerodero.
Okay.
Which means that our village was Kerodero, although I never saw it, she said. But there were 5 villages which, we kind of intermarried within those villages. And so my Nana's village was also Kerodero. So Naveen and I were introduced because of that. Naveen is a journalist and she runs this fabulous NGO in Kerodero. There's a lot of amazing work going on there. So Kerodero is also a place which now kind of rings a bell like Sakkar does.
Right.
But the other place in Sakkar, which is really fascinating, is Sadbelo. Have you heard of Sadbelo?
Yes, I have actually. Again, I didn't realize the significance of any of this. Yeah. So we've been to, as kids growing up, my Nana used to live in South Bombay off Warden Road, just close to Mahalakshmi Temple. And whenever we visited them, which was pretty much every weekend, we'd go to the Sadbelo near the Mahalakshmi Temple and visit that. Again, religious significance, but nobody ever brought up the point that, this had its history and origins, but I'm sure you'll tell us a bit more about where it came from.
My understanding is that Sadbelo was this temple in the middle of the river,
Yep.
the Indus, and Sakkar and Rohiri on the other side. And I've seen pictures which was sent to me. Of course, you can see you just have to Google and you'll see pictures. But I've seen some really spectacular pictures taken by Zulfikar Ali Kaloro, who is an anthropologist and a writer. Yep. And of course, we are planning to get him as a guest on this podcast at some point to tell us about the places of worship in Sindh.
Yep.
So Sadbelo was a really special place which everybody visited. I mean, it was pilgrimage. You had to get into a boat to get there. And I read something written by Bhagwan Gidwani, who was senior in the aviation ministry in India. And he wrote, he was a writer, and he wrote 2 novels, one of which is called The Return of the Aryans. I'm just going to read out a little bit about a line that he mentioned, in which he mentions Sadbela. In my student days at Sadbela, a famous Hindu temple at Sakkar in Sindh, I saw Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was known to us as Zulfi then. He was at a langar, the community meal of Sadbelo. And I also saw him taking away a little halwa, which was served with the meal. He could not have been there just for the free meal, for he was always flush with money. Maybe he was there to render thanks for a wish fulfilled or to seek blessings for a wish for the future. I don't know. I sat with him and exchanged greetings, for like many of us, I had enjoyed the hospitality of his household at Larkana, but certainly did not ask him why he was at Sadbela. Recently, a South Indian friend questioned me, how come no one asked Bhutto why he was there? Only a non-Sindhi would ask such a question. For us, it was not too uncommon in Sindh to see Hindus in dargahs and Muslims at Hindu holy places. Sindhi Muslims accepted our ancient heritage of Mohenjo-daro as their own. When Muslims from India poured into Sindh, bent on loot and massacre, it was Sindhi Muslims who protected Hindus. So that's about Bhutto and a little bit about Sadbela. And I also remember Hira Thakur Bhojwani, who is in her late 90s now. She lives in Bombay. And she came from an illustrious family of Sindh. And she actually studied in Shantiniketan. She went to school in Shantiniketan. She told me about how she had the family had been invited for Zulfikar Bhutto's circumcision ceremony. And she could remember him lying on the carpet, howling in pain. But, many people remember Bhutto. And, these kind of links with the places, even though those places were left behind so long ago, I found that many people still retain them. Do you feel like, when you say the word Sakkar, for example, does that ring a bell in you?
Now it does. Today, if you ask me, yes, it does, because now I know where we came from. I think if you ask many of my family, they probably don't know actually this. And I'm sure many in my generation, probably don't have that connection anymore. Yes, we know about Hyderabad, we know about Karachi, and, we'll talk a bit about Karachi, the famous Karachi sweets.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't think people would have as much connection or knowledge of, their origins or their ancestry, or even what I would call the sort of smaller cities or towns of Sindh anymore. I don't think
unless somebody has told them,
correct,
Gota, blah blah blah.
yeah. And as we discussed in the first episode, not many of the people were willing to divulge that level of detail, or were reluctant to do it, unless they were really probed or asked the question.
Yeah, they didn't speak. So, this is, it reminds me of the time when we had visitors from Pakistan. And of course, in India, that is extremely unusual.
Yep.
But what happened was there was this Rotary exchange program, which some very enthusiastic Rotarians in my city, Pune, had, very ambitious actually. They wanted to invite 60 Rotarians from Pakistan to come to Pune.
Right.
And they did, and they at one of the Rotary meetings, they asked if anybody would like to have them stay with them, because in the Rotary exchange programs, you stay with the
with your family. Yeah.
So you have the experience of living with the family. So my husband and I said yes, we would. In the end, there was not 60; there were much fewer because, of course, visa restrictions, blah blah blah. But we got Tehseen and Ashraf Aga. And it was really an amazing experience, because first we knew that we were getting two people. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know how old they'd be. We didn't know, whether we have to keep a little prayer mat for them to do their namaz on. We had no. But anyway, they came, and they were just a little older than us, but they were so similar to us in every way that it was just uncanny. It was just this wonderful understanding that we are the same people. We are the same people. We are so similar in so many ways. We have language in common, not just the accent with which we speak English, which is the same. You can't. But even, whether you call it Hindi or you call it Urdu, you speak in that language as well. So we took them around, and one day they were here for like a good, I think 7 or 8 days. It was lovely. And one day Tehseen says to me, "Why do you have so many Karachi sweet shops in your city?" And that was, kind of a jolt out of this complacency where you see Karachi sweet shops everywhere. You're going to get samosa. You're going to get, all these yummy chatpata things there.
Yeah.
Never think about it as a city in another country, a city which is known for its rate of crime and, violence. And you just never do that, because in your mind, it's just, the people who named it were people who had left Karachi. It was their home. They carried it in their hearts. They didn't want to leave it. So they used that to comfort themselves. At least they have a bit of what they left behind. So so for us, Karachi is like this really big word, which means a spectrum of things. And I've heard so many affectionate memories of people who lived in Karachi, visits to Clifton Beach. And Meena Bhagat, my friend Meena, who runs Oxford Bookstore in Calcutta, she went back and she was looking for the Gurmandar, which was in the Amil colony. And her father used to sing there. So she had these really, really lovely childhood memories of her father singing every evening in the Gurmandar. and she couldn't find it. She could not find it.
Okay.
There is a place in Karachi which has, I think they said it has a bus stop, which is called Guru Mandir. And here, this also tells you something, because, when you say it in Sindhi, it's Guru Mandir. But when you move to Hindi/Urdu, which is what the migrants were speaking, it becomes Guru Mandir. So it is slightly different, and it might even have shifted. But we really tried very hard to track it down. And I found an article in the Dawn by somebody called Akhtar Baluch. And Akhtar Baluch was a senior journalist. Very sadly, we lost him in August of this year. But he was always on the trail of the traces left behind by them. Yeah, so he's done work for Dawn. You can see a picture of which I have a copy of that, where you can see a place which has the word Guru Mandir on it. And we don't know whether, it didn't look familiar to Mena, but it wouldn't, right? Because after 70 years and, everything in the world has changed, and you're a child and, your father was sitting inside, you don't know what the windows were like, and everything is now shuttered and all that.
Yep.
Akhtar Baluch also wrote this piece which was called the Beheaded Benefactor. The Beheaded, yeah.
Wow, sounds grim.
It does, and it's not as grim as it sounds, but it is grim. The article was about Seth Harchandrai Vishendas, who was actually a city father of Karachi. And he built up the Karachi municipality. And when he died, they built a statue in his honor, and it was placed outside. It was erected outside the Karachi Municipal Corporation building. Okay. Now, after partition, most of the statues were destroyed. A statue of Seth Harchandrai was decapitated. So it stood outside the KMC building for a while without its head, and then it was taken away. When you look, I used to do this years ago when I first started. People would tell me, oh, my grandfather was the mayor of Karachi. And I would say, no, that's not true. Because according to Wikipedia, the first Parsi mayor of Karachi was Jamsheddin Nasaranji Mehta. And the second Hindu mayor was, I've forgotten, maybe Durga Das Advani, or was he the fourth? But, there were... it was listed and their religion was named. One consider religion to be important when you're listing mayors. But Harchandrai Vishendas may not have been on this list of mayors, but he definitely did a lot to build the city of Karachi. But who actually founded Karachi? That is something which I was looking for a good source to tell us who founded Karachi. And I found it in this book, which is
lovely,
a fabulous book. It's called Sindhanama. It's by Nandita Bhavnani and Geeta Simois. And it's got so much material. And the best thing about it, it's got both text and images. And the images are really fabulous. They did a lot of work. Unfortunately, Geeta Simois passed away before the book was published. But so Karachi, apparently it starts off, the story starts in a place called Bandar, which was a port where the river hub meets the Arabian Sea. And there was this group of merchants who were trading. They were using the port for their trade. And that's not a new story for Sindh. Yep. That was something that was being done right since Mohenjo-daro, right? Of course, the geography was different because the river keeps changing and the shoreline changes. It was thought that, there is a big port, which is named, you read in historical documents, and it's thought that was what is now called Thatta. Okay. But these guys were at this place called Bandar, and the port was silting, so they had to move. And they found, they wandered around, and the person who's mentioned is Seth Bhojmal, who is quite well known. His grandson, Naumal Hochand, is also part of the history of Sindh, very prominent. His memoirs are there if anyone's interested in reading them. Very, very interesting. It tells you a little bit about life at that time. And of course, Seth Bhojmal is whom the Bhojwanis are descended from.
Right.
What's in this Sindhanama, Nandita's book, is that a group of men set out to find an alternative site for port. Among them was a young man of 20 called Bhojumal, an enterprising merchant originally from central Sindh. Having fought with his stepmother, he had run away from home at the age of 16 and had settled in Karachi, Mandar, where he'd set up a flourishing business trading with numerous other ports. Now traveling eastwards, Bhojumal and his companions came upon Dirbo, a small village on the coast. This consisted of about two dozen huts belonging to the local fishermen, surrounded by tamarind and wild caper trees, bushes, and mangroves. A bit different from what Karachi is now. Close by was a pool of water known as Kalachi Jokun. It was an ideal spot. There was a natural landlocked harbour, and fresh drinking water could be obtained from wells dug in the dry bed of the Liari River nearby. The people of Karakbandar came to build their houses at this new spot, assisted by labourers brought in from outside. The city was fortified with a wall made of mud and mangrove wood, punctuated by circular towers at regular intervals. This fort had 2 gates. The gate to the south faced the salty water of the sea and was known as Kharodar, or Salty Gate. The gate to the north faced the sweet water of the Liari River and was known as Mitrodar, or Sweet Gate. Karachi's main market, a long covered bazaar, ran the length of the city from one gate to the other. The city was divided into different neighborhoods for various communities, with narrow lanes dividing one neighborhood from another. Once construction was complete, the people of Karakbandar moved in, and thus Kalachi Jogot, or the village of Kalachi, grew into a port. So that is how Seth Bhojumal and the Hindu merchants actually picked the spot for Karachi and started building it. And I think the biggest expansion it had was soon after the British came to Sindh. They occupied Sindh, of course, illegally, in violation of the treaties they'd signed with the princes of Sindh, the Talpur princes, and they took over by force. And they moved the capital from Hyderabad to Karachi, and then Karachi became, this cosmopolitan place which had a lot of influences, of course, from the Parsis, who were the elite in British times, but because Sindh was under the Bombay presidency, there was a lot of Maharashtrians, Gujaratis, and it was very cosmopolitan. Of course, the Sindhi traders were very much part of that,
because they're probably using the ports.
Of course, the port was being used all the time, including from Hyderabad. But before Karachi, Hyderabad was the capital of Sindh, and it was a very, very important place for the Hindus. In fact, I met Ram Advani, who is now no more, sadly. He was a very well-loved bookseller of Lucknow. His family had come from Sindh and they'd set up this store before partition. So he wasn't that connected to his roots, but he had, like all of us, he had a grandmother who told him stories. And one of the things he told me is that people valued having been born in Hyderabad. So that, you mentioned this, right? That your family was actually from Hyderabad, although they were originally from Sakkar. Same with my mom's family. They were total Hyderabadis. But what he said is that being born in Hyderabad gave you a certain lineage. So people would make sure, even if they lived in Karachi or they lived up country or whatever, they would send their wives. And of course, they'd have, homes in Hyderabad. The baby would be born there.
Sounds very familiar. As a South Bombayite, now you want to be associated with certain parts of the city.
Yeah.
But just going back to Karachi for 1 second, it's such an interesting and unique history. And as you mentioned, in Pune, we used to visit it as kids very, very early on, and I always remember seeing, as you said, all these sweet shops, Karachi Sweet Mart, Karachi Sweet this, Karachi Sweet that. Never thought about it, and as you never associated it. The only memory I would always have was if we went to Pune, and in the 80s and 90s, to go to Pune was either you take the long train ride or a 6-hour drive across the mountains, and so it was a big deal to go to Pune even. And then we would go and everyone would be like, Karachi mahu vati mithai vati acho, huh? So it would be like you're going to Karachi to bring mithai.
Yeah.
So, and you still don't think about it like I'm actually going to Pune, but I'm going to a place in Pune called Karachi Sweet Mart to get the mithai. I'm not going to Karachi to get the mithai,
Yeah.
but maybe there's, a sort of a message in there somewhere that people felt good about getting something from Karachi
Yeah, it was from home, right? Because
yeah,
and it was, food and stuff that you're used to. So yeah, there was that emotional uh, factor to it.
yeah.
So, the thing is that Hyderabad also has a huge Hindu legacy, and that goes way back to the founding of Hyderabad, which was in the mid 18th century.
Right.
And that was a time when the rulers of Sindh were the Kaloro princes. And there, they had a capital in a place called Khudabad. Of course, the Kaloros kept starting new capitals, one day here, one day there, but Khudabad was a stable capital for a while. But then various reasons, partly attacking tribes, partly, river floods in the river, they needed to move. So the Kalora prince, he deputed his wise minister, Diwan Gidumal, to go and find a new place. And Gidumal and his team got into a boat and sailed down the river. And I read about this in a translation of a Perumal book about the Hindus of Sindh. And he says that Diwan Gidumal set out with some men and 2 boatloads of money to look for a place. And, they came, they went exploring, and then they came to a place which was a little crescent in the river. On one side flowed the Puleli, which was a tributary of the Indus. And in the distance, you could see a mountain, which was a bald limestone ridge. And they docked and they got off, and they decided that this was going to be the new capital. It was then a fishing village called Neran Kot. That's where Hyderabad, of course, it was named Hyderabad by the Kalora ruler. But Gidumal was involved in building the fort, the Pakko Kilo, which still stands. And he also kind of drew up the civic layout of the city. People came from Khudabad and from other places. They set up trade. They began working in the court of the Mir. So that's your Amils and Bhaibans of Sindh, the Amils who were working for the Mir, the Bhaibans who were in trade. People today still remember, like my mom remembered the Ganjo Takkar, which means the bald mountain. They could see that. And then people remember Gidu Bandar, which is actually the place where Gidumal's boat landed. Yeah, it was the port. And everybody who knows Hyderabad knows that there's what used to be called a lunatic asylum in Gidu Bandar. So, when the kids would fight, they'd say, I'm going to send you to Gidu Bandar. You belong to Gidu Bandar.
Yes.
And,
but why did they name it Hyderabad? And do you know if there's any connection with the Hyderabad
it's named for Hyder Ali, the Prophet's nephew, Hyder Ali.
Right.
But apart from that, they're geographically different. The cultures are different. So I don't think there's any other
relation.
The origin of the name is also the same. Yeah. Later on, of course, we do know this. Your family came from there, and so did mine. And till today, they still have gittis, which were laid out by Diwan Gidumal. Gitti is a Sindhi word for lane or stream.
Lane.
So they have the lane where the Advanis used to live, which is the Advani Gitti, and they have the Gidwani Gitti, and they have I don't know whether they have the Sadrangani Gitti, but they do have Advani Gitti, and they do have Gittis till today.
Are they still called that?
They still call that. Because there's this huge, a lot of Sindhis, they still value the Hindu contribution to Sindh. They still feel the loss of the Hindus. They still feel the loss. I was telling you about the statue of Harchandrai Vishnudas. Yes. I can tell you about another statue from Shikarpur. which is Rai Bahadur Udhav Das Tarachand. So he was a wealthy merchant, but he was a huge philanthropist. And he built a hospital in Shikarpur, which is still there. It's one of the main hospitals in Shikarpur today. Now, his statue, when all this breaking down of statues was going on, was just quietly taken away and kept safely.
Oh, wow.
Still being looked after. So, yeah, Shikarpur was a place which was also, a very important place. And we have this huge community of Sindhi Hindus who are Shikarpuris.
Shikarpuri Sindhis.
So do you know any Shikarpuri Sindhis, or do you know anything about them? Or?
We used to have Shikarpuri Sindhi neighbors, but again,
were they different from your family?
No, actually, they were not. The more I think about it, they spoke the same language. We had all the same mannerisms, and when my grandmom and their grandmom sort of interacted, it was just like two Sindhis talking. That's it.
Right, but that's to you. I mean, they knew.
To me, yeah. I bet between them they knew, oh, you're Shikarpuri, you're Bhaiband. There was probably some underlying tone somewhere, but
it's like the differences in accent or some words being used.
Words are definitely different.
Even, do you put tomato in your curry or do you not put tomato?
Yes.
Things like that were surely going to be different. Shikarpur is famous for food. Shikarpuris even today are, like real foodies, and obviously what we know today is unhealthy, most of it. So actually, technically, we should have the names of the shops should have been Shikarpur, not Karachi, right? Because
the good food, the good stuff is there.
But Shikarpur is known among the Sindhis. It's known for being the hub of banking. Shikarpuris, they used to be called money lenders, which was kind of a derogatory term, because if you're a money lender, nobody realizes how important you are to the economy. People only know that you are this really cruel guy who wants to get his money back.
Out to make a buck, right? Yeah,
forget about that. I mean, you can compare giving your money to a Shikarpuri money lender, or if you get a loan from a corporate bank, they will want their money back with plenty of interest anyway. So it's just, this feeling, it's like a Shylock thing, right? But why the banking trade it's really important. I think at some point we'll have to do an episode where we talk in detail about how the banking trade came up. And I think we have to call our friend Nandu Asrani, co-contributor to the Sindhi Tapestry.
Yes, it would be lovely to have him. He has so much.
He's like fifth generation. And in fact, I mentioned Udhav Das Tarachand. He is actually Nandu's great-great-grandfather. He has this legacy of his ancestors were trading on that route between Central Asia and the Far East. And that was the camel trade, of course. And the person who actually documented that, that was going on for centuries. But it was only written about very recently, as recently as 1999, 2000, by this French historian, Claude Markowitz. You read
I have come across his book as well, yes.
Yeah. Everybody's read it because he did this monumental work on the Shikarpuris and on the Sindhwarkis also.
On the Sindhwarkis, yes.
It all up. I mean, it's been there for a long, long time, but nobody had ever talked about it. Nobody had ever noticed it. But yeah, we mentioned this I think we mentioned this in the last episode as well.
But trust a French professor to find this out, right?
Yes. So that's something about Shikarpur as well.
So you've visited all these places, or have you visited most of them in your travels?
No. It's so hard for an Indian to visit Pakistan. We did go. We visited, as I told you in the last episode. We went to Sindh to launch my book, Vanished Homeland, at the Karachi Literature Festival in Karachi. From there, we did go to Hyderabad. We did go to Hyderabad,
okay.
Because that was the place, right?
Yes, of course.
We did go looking for traces of my mother's home, which we didn't find. But then we went to the railway station. We went there because my mom had told me that her grandfather he died early, but he had been the station master at the Hyderabad railway station. So we were very, very eager to see this place. And we walked in, and over the ticket windows, there are these big boards which give the names of the station masters. And I was like, oh my God, is my great-grandfather there? But he wasn't, because they started at 1947. And then we went in to meet the station master. And there were my husband and two of our children who had come with us, and the other person, our host, who was taking us in, which is actually Ashraf Aga, who I just told you about.
Got it, the one who stayed with you.
Because we were going to Karachi, we were so excited. We were going to see Tehseen and Ashraf again. And in fact, the girls stayed with them while we stayed in the accommodation provided by Karachi Festival, Karachi Light Fest. So the girls were staying with them, and Ashraf said, no, I have to take you to Hyderabad to show you your mum's hometown. And he walked with us into the station master's office. And we went in, and he introduced us, and he said, I brought special visitors for you from India. And the station master looked really worried.
Why?
Well, because we were from India, and he didn't want to get into,
trouble. Right.
Like, unfortunately, our countries, a lot of times we know that we're one people, and it only keeps the arms and ammunition manufacturers happy for anybody to be fighting. Yeah. But we're so under this propaganda from all around us. So he was a bit worried. But he was a really good guy. I mean, you could see from his office that he was interested in history, because he had these timelines up of the way real lines coming up. He had some vintage photos and things. But he said to me, sorry, we have no records from before 1947. Because we didn't have Pakistan before that. So, we just destroyed everything. And this is what he said to me. But I could see inside, behind, there was a little room inside, and I could see this really old colonial furniture and table chair and cupboard, and thinking that, my great-grandfather sat there. He kept his
probably.
Yeah.
But in moving about and, in your visits and stuff, what about the architecture and the buildings and, structures? I'm guessing a lot.
That is such a lovely question you asked me, because, you see things, you see these old houses, and you wonder, and of course they're not, I mean, all our cities have these old colonial buildings.
Correct.
Which you can't, they're barely recognizable as, you can see the stonework in the back, you can see the architecture, but most of them on the ground floor, there are shops, and they've got posters and stuff, so you can't really see them. But in Hyderabad, you still see unmistakable signs of the Hindus who lived there. And one of the most poignant ones I ever saw, and there are a lot of them like that, but I have a photo of this. So I think if you want to view this podcast on YouTube, we might be able to show you that photo. It says Lachu Lodge, 1940.
Okay.
Think about Lachu. Who was Lachu? Maybe it was named for somebody. Maybe it was named for someone's son. Maybe Lachu was a son. Or maybe Lachu...
My grandmother was called Lachu, actually.
Right. So maybe, could it have been for Lachu, your grandma?
I don't know.
But whoever it was, I mean, it was 1940. They were happy in that place for 7 years. After that, everything went. Now, there's this really interesting thing which I've come across in the last, not very long, probably 2 or 3 years. These buildings have started being noticed. And they're there in Hyderabad, and they're there in Karachi. They were built in the 30s and 40s, and they were built with that money coming in, which we keep talking about, from overseas. I'm assuming most of it was coming from there, because they're really fabulous, solid buildings, which must have cost a lot to build and maintain. Yep. And in Pakistan, they're called Hindu architecture.
Oh, is that the term given to them?
That's what I've heard it referred to in conferences. I've read this term in the newspapers as well. And the name is coined by very well-meaning people who want to respect the fact that Hindus left something important behind. But when I read the word Hindu architecture, it kind of makes me laugh because, do buildings have a religion? I mean, is this a building that doesn't eat cows? Is this a building that has this really awful caste system? I also find it a bit of a misnomer because I've seen the exact same buildings with that architecture in downtown Cairo. The same kind of balconies and the same embellishments. We were driving around downtown Cairo, and my husband and I were like, "Oh, this looks so familiar. Where have we seen this?"
Wow.
It was Hyderabad and Karachi.
Interesting.
So, more Hyderabad, really. Lots of buildings like that in Hyderabad. And I don't have any proof for this, but I would imagine that the people who had their stores in Cairo
probably came over and used
the same architects. They might have been architects from other countries. They might not have been Sindhi architects. They might not have been Egyptian architects. They might have been, architects from other places. But these were clearly built at the same time, and they were following similar design principles.
Wow, so that network actually did have other influences beyond just trade and business. Maybe they were just carrying ideas as well.
They were carrying cultural artifacts. They were bringing back things and they've left a trail. And I think, this is a little bit of something somebody needs to research into and look at the links and see whether the term Hindu architecture is really valid. And, I think that term is there now. It's there in the lexicon, but what does it really mean?
So are they then making efforts to preserve this Hindu architecture, so to say?
I think there is. There are a lot of people who want to preserve what they have. So they do a lot of work in Sindh on preserving the legacy. Yeah.
Because in at least in Bombay, I think Pune is probably better than Bombay in that many of the old buildings are in state of absolute shambles with, nobody taking care or protecting or even having a thought to preserve it. And then you come to a place like London where a lot of the historic buildings are not only preserved, but, when you walk around, you see these blue plaques that talk about significant or important people who lived there. And so it's good to hear in a way that there is this sense of, preservation or appreciation of culture and past that maybe somebody, not saying you have to put a blue plaque there, but, to some degree at least notice. I think a
blue plaque is not a bad idea at all. I think I don't know whether it's done in Sindh. We don't do much of it in India yet, but it'll come.
Hopefully before the buildings disappear, though.
Hopefully they'll keep the building standing, at least in some form.
Okay, Saz, I think we've done a whirlwind tour of Sindh. We've gone to Karachi in Sindh, but we've also been to Karachi in Pune. We've done Hyderabad. We've done Shikarpur. We've set the stall for probably many future episodes and, potential guests we can have. It's been insightful for me in many ways to know about all of this because I didn't know a lot of it. And, for our listeners and viewers, again, we've said you can follow us on Tapestry Pod on Twitter. We have a YouTube channel where you can watch a lot of this, and we'll promise to upload some pictures. But do listen in and stay tuned for our next one.
And I also want to say that if you have a story from the place your ancestors come from, just get in touch.
We'd love to tell it. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
झूलेलाल जो झूलो ऐं सखर साध वेलो पार कर चपासा वेड़ी जब जो वेलो सिरी चंदू दासी जिंदा पीर वारा सिंधड़ी सुहारी कलंदर जा नारा आओ जा आहिन के गुरु बख्शाणी शर्मा शिवाणी कविरा जानी अडवाणी किंगर हेमनाणी हिंदू